Hello, I'm Sheree Burton, and it is Women Seeking Wholeness time. I actually blast these podcasts out every Wednesday, so it's Women Seeking Wholeness Wednesday. It's a great season to just go within. We're heading in, to early fall, late summer. Such a beautiful time for reflection amidst the chaos of the planet, to just get in and get real and get who you are. And that is what today's episode is all about. I have got the brilliant Marisa Gowdy. She's written a book called The Sovereignty Knot, and she has done so much work. She's actually a scholar, but she started as an American student studying in Ireland and discovered the myth and magic of the sovereignty goddess. So she kind of combines her passion for Celtic myth and Irish folklore with her feminist vision of creating an equitable world that is more beautiful, bearable, and bold. She's an author, a scholar, a writing coach. She does energy healing. You can find her on marisagoudy.com, marisagoudy.com. Can hear all about her sovereignty lessons and her sovereignty writers circles, but I just loved how she brought in wonder, creativity, and magic into this conversation and how it relates to the circle of life that we all are in the midst of, and that we can access this magic at will. I want to invite you also to continue to visit ShereeBurton.com. I've got some cool stuff launching, everything from marriage courses to a feminine boss school. Of course, you can pick up my freebie, that free healing kit right there on the homepage. And just be watching because Women Seeking Wholeness on Facebook is about to blow open. We're going to be diving into some of these conversations in a little more depth. So let's welcome Marisa. Marisa, thank you so much for joining me today. This is such a timely conversation. I'm so excited.
Oh, me too, Sheree. I'm really excited as well.
So for everyone who's just listening and hasn't maybe seen your beautiful face, when you and I first connected on the phone and you started talking about Ireland, I told you this before, but I literally pictured you with red hair. And then when I got your picture, I'm like, oh my gosh, that's totally how I pictured you.
There it is.
But you and I both share this Irish heritage. I've always been drawn to Ireland. I actually made a trip there with my family a few years ago. Mm-hmm. And when I got there, literally when I landed on the land and started driving through the country from the airport, I was just like, I'm home. I can't even, I know my ancestor, big, huge, my dad's, name is Lynch. And I know that I literally have that as a maiden name, but just to be there and feel the land, I have to say, it was more than just my ancestry I was connecting to in retrospect, as I've learned more about the divine feminine and the rich history, which I didn't know at the time I went there 3 or 4 years ago, completely the tie-in with the Celtic. I can see that I was also connecting to something with the feminine there that I hadn't identified until later. Now it makes me just want to go back. But yeah, give us your intro into this whole world of the Celtic myth, Irish folklore, and the feminine, how that drew you in.
Oh, I just want to first say that sense of when you describe that, like that landing, you get from the rental car, first driving out into the countryside. I have that kind of that full body yes, because, I remember so well, I first went to Ireland when I was 18, and I was, visiting a boy who was studying abroad, and I was a freshman in college. It was my first big declaration of independence. I bought my plane tickets and then told my parents I was going to Europe. And then I've returned, and I went back there for several years of college myself in graduate school, and I've returned only a couple of times since because life gets in the way. But there's that you'll never forget your first time sort of sense of just saying here, I've been here before, I've never been here, I've always been here. And that new kind of breath that comes through. And that's, something that I guess I knew in my bones before I did get there at 18. I was a really sad, depressed middle school kid looking for something. And somehow Ireland landed on my lap through, of all things, that Tom Cruise movie, Far and Away. As ridiculous as it is, you never know what's going to start you on your path. I was a depressed kid who watched that movie over and over again, and that just opened a door. And all of a sudden, I fell into the arms of Irish folklore. And that's really where I found the goddess. That's where I found the divine feminine, because in Ireland, in the Celtic world especially, the land itself is so deeply feminine, and the stories are so informed by by the goddess, by this sense that, you know, we are all coming from the mother. Those stories have never gone away from the most ancient Celtic and pre-Celtic times, and they still endure in all these beautiful, surprising ways, from the earth itself to the poetry you might read to the conversations you have with people when you're over there, just realizing like, they've never left her and she's never left them, and she's everywhere right now.
And would you say that that's still embraced? I mean, I know it survives in the folklore and whatnot, and maybe some myth storytelling, but would you say that the general sense or accepting of the feminine goddess or archetype is still alive there, or mother? I mean, or has it just been dimmed?
I mean, you know, like, it's certainly not as if everyone's walking down the street like discussing the goddess, that's for sure. Yeah. But at the same time, it's interesting the ways in which you see it carry through. So, you know, Ireland being so primarily a Catholic country, or, you know, it's certainly changing these days, but the sense that, you know, Mary, the Blessed Virgin Mother, was held that energy in certain ways. And the sense that there are so many mountains named after the hag. The Cailleach is the crone, and there's many different features of the earth itself that they name for her in different places. And it's this sense of almost like it's so baked into the culture that it isn't necessarily something that is remarked upon. But when you start to look for it, you realize, you know, there's Maeve, the great warrior queen, who, you know, you can follow her trail across the country from when she went on this great battle. You can go and visit this place called Knocknarea on the west coast in Sligo. That's it's a mountain with a cairn on the top where Queen Maeve is said to be buried. So there's these little things that are so far from our North American consciousness that for them are just, well, yeah, that's the hill over there. And yeah, that's Maeve's Hill. Of course it is. Yeah. And it swept in the same way that, you know, fairies are still real there. Fairies are energies you don't mess with. And so when you're with a people for whom, you know, you don't meddle with a fairy circle or cut down a fairy tree in order to put a highway down, you're moving in a different kind of consciousness. And yet, you know, they speak English, and it's very much a lot like, you know, any other part of the Western world, but with this like magical glint in its eye.
Mm-hmm. So I interviewed Ada Markarine. She's become a dear soul sister. She lives in Dublin, and she's written a book on Mary Magdalene. Actually, she won the Hay House UK or Hay House Ireland, one of the two contests for her writing in Mary Magdalene. So I interviewed her for my Mary Magdalene series, and talking about her awakening with the land and how, you know, being on the coast and the callings and the rumblings within her to study Mary Magdalene. I want to ask you about that, because it is believed by many that Mary Magdalene was in Europe. Of course, I know she was in France. I've been there. I've felt that and seen that, and the rich history and tradition there with her presence. Have you studied Mary Magdalene at all, or has that ever come into your in the Irish tradition? Has there been any talk?
I wouldn't as much say it's from the Irish tradition as much it's certainly part of my own, you know, collection of beliefs. Like I think Elizabeth Cunningham wrote a fabulous series of novels imagining that Mary Magdalene was actually a red-haired Celtic woman named Maeve. And that really drew my whole world together. And since then, Elizabeth's become my mentor. She actually wrote the foreword to my book. So that her energy has absolutely infused my way of looking at the world, though I wouldn't necessarily say I met Mary Magdalene in Ireland, it was the sense that this is all coming from the same great cauldron of energy.
Yeah,
we're all drawing from this in different ways, and our stories are interweaving, and we keep saying, sister, I see you. I see you. How are you telling this story? I'm telling it this way. Oh, and then we keep layering and layering together.
Yeah, I actually ordered that series after you and I talked. So they're sitting there ready to be read. I'm going to devour them. I just love the creative imagining that can come from when someone takes themselves out of traditional patriarchy and puts themselves in the mother and just immerses themselves. And it is so unique. Everyone's spiritual path and everyone's awakening is so unique. I think what draws me into this whole ancient European presence of Mary Magdalene and the goddess and the priestess is just this, how is this relevant to me now? What did they communicate that was lost that is being now reclaimed? And I think that's sort of that's happening en masse, honestly, with many women. And it's one of the reasons I wanted to do this podcast. Okay, I want to talk about the word sovereignty. I love that it's the name of your book, The Sovereignty Knot. And my listeners know this because I use sovereignty a lot. I just throw that word out quite a bit. And I did a whole podcast solo episode on sovereignty and what it means to me. Yeah. Will you share with us what you've discovered about it, and especially in relation to the goddess?
Yeah, so I understood sovereignty when I was in college doing Irish studies, and met the sovereignty goddess. For in the Celtic world particularly, the sovereignty goddess is at once the embodiment of the land itself and this magical divine human being who comes on the scene at moments when they most need her. And, we can think about all the different ways in which this, that concept of the divine marriage, that sense of the divine feminine and the sacred masculine coming together. The goddess comes and picks the worthy king. And with her blessing, the land then has its caretaker, its steward, the one who will care for both the earth itself and her people. And that just, my starry-eyed fairy queen loving self just said, wait a minute, that's real? Oh. And so I've now lived the last 20 plus years just dancing with that, looking at the ways in which, wow, that is still really heteronormative, and it really kind of takes certain tropes that have been taken over by the patriarchy and packages them up. And it's also coming from something so much more ancient before it was, corrupted by different power sources, be it whether, the church coming in and using these stories in order to teach certain lessons. There's always been something more ancient and primal and true to the sovereignty goddess. And I've always felt her as being deeply resonant to who we are now. As you were just saying before, that sense of a reclaiming, I think we're all being invited into this new sort of co-creative relationship with these ancient enduring forces that have never really gone anywhere. It's just that women in particular didn't have the freedom to dance with them again like we have now. And so when I look at sovereignty now, it's both calling on those really ancient traditions of, a belief in the goddess. It's very much rooted into a relationship with the earth, whether it's that you're in Ireland or somewhere in the Celtic world, or you're somewhere in, in America, just finding your way in what's in some ways a new land for your ancestors if you're someone of European heritage. And then also calling into it that idea that the sovereignty goddess existed to help the people. Because for me, I think sometimes sovereignty gets confused with this over reliance on the self and on the individual, which by all means, you can't pour from an empty cup. So you have to be filling your own well and really be focusing on your worth and all that you are. And
Mm-hmm.
we do that in service to the greater collective. So you can take that cup and pour it out for others in order to inspire them to find their own sovereignty to be filled. So I'm always interested in this work, especially right now when, we're looking at how society more than ever needs to be strengthened and awakened. It's the inside work in order to do the outer work.
Yeah. Yeah. That's what it feels like. It's just this beautiful, nourishing energy and, I guess, way of being that is cultivated, which then, with that metaphor you use, like you're filled up and you can build others if you aren't receiving. And I love that you phrased it this way, that, sovereignty isn't necessarily self-focused. It's about service.
Mm-hmm.
Because when you are aligned and when you are filled really with the beauties of the earth, of nature, of your own divine soul, if you will, then you naturally, just by your presence, honestly, will be in service to others. But how that flows to humanity is specific to each woman. How that energy manifests in her when she steps into her true alignment and she is filled and nourished. How she expresses that will be very, very unique to her own essence and soul.
Yes, that's one of the reasons why I chose this image of the knot. Also, of course, because of Celtic knot work and how beautiful it is, and also because of the knots we tend to tie ourselves in as modern women, but also that sense of intricate design. Like each woman is creating her own way of nourishing and growing her own personal vision and power. And then how she's going to manifest that in the world is always going to be different and done, according to your own rhythm, your own dance.
Let me ask you, because you referenced the patriarchy, and there has been a very strong Catholic tradition in Ireland. And actually, when I talked with Adamar, that was her tradition, and she's seeing sort of this en masse exit from Catholicism within Ireland. I know that that's happening in the U.S. A lot of people are becoming disillusioned with religion and needing that freedom to do their own spiritual path and find what God means to them. I see sovereignty that way. I see sovereignty as the embracing of your own direct experience with God, the divine goddess, divine father, divine mother, however we want to view that. How have you taken that into, I don't know if you have a religious background or if you want to share.
Recovering Catholic kid.
Recovering Catholic kid.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's part of the story I tell, because I think that there was absolutely that level of, I'm grateful to have been raised in a tradition from which I got to rebel. And it worked for me that, I would be sitting in a Catholic church when I was in high school, just yearning for a connection. And I used to say, I have the spirituality of a rock, which at the time felt terrible. Like, I'm like an inanimate object. And now I'm like, I understood that I had the spirituality of a rock. Like I was one with the earth. And I look back now and I'm like, at 15, I already got it. And, there was that place to kind of sit and say, my divinity for me is not inside a building. I used to go out and right before communion, I used to always pretend that I was getting nauseous and I would go out and hide in the garden next to the statue of Mary. And that's where I started to realize that I am here, that I can start to breathe more deeply, to understand what it is that I've been told I ought to find in a building, but never quite could.
Isn't that beautiful? I am a huge proponent of we should take all of our worship outside. And it's also sterile. I shouldn't say all. There's not a lot of movement. It's sitting still and there's some beauty in that, of course, just stillness. But when it comes to soul work, we aren't doing that in religious settings. And I think, and I told you this before, but I love the word magic now, where I was super scared of it before. It was couched in Satan and the occult and paganism and witches. And I have my own views on those things now because those things have been clouded as well. I believe there was a lot of truth in those and some of those practices and rituals and traditions because they were of the earth, and so they were considered pagan, which paganism is anyway. So magic, how do you, because I know it's part of the title of your book, A Woman's Way to Freedom, Power, Love, and Magic. Mm-hmm. How do you define magic?
I use a definition that originally came from a cult writer named Dion Fortune in the early 20th century, and then it was taken on by Starhawk, who is a woman who is very much the mother, maybe she's the grandmother now, of the modern Wiccan movement, the modern witchcraft movement, which that's really in many ways how I moved out of the Catholic Church into something more. And it was always very much based on being out in nature and understanding that my faith was going to be found in the elements of earth and air and fire and water, and that sense of creating new rituals with like-minded, like-hearted women. And so the definition that I learned early on and has carried me all the way through is magic is the art of changing consciousness at will. And when I really love that. Yeah, right. Because it's at once like, that is seriously practical. And that is so mystical all at the same time. And because that's my whole goal, is to live this practical, magical life, because I'm a mom, I'm an entrepreneur, I'm a wife married to an engineer. And I talk to fairies in the garden, and I, am constantly having conversations with my sacred guides and inviting other women to call more magic into their lives. And that's so much for me. It's related to this idea of sovereignty, because there's so much in the world we cannot control, be it what's happening in the headlines or our own past traumas or what the people around us are doing. But what we can always do is come back to that sovereign core of who we are and say, okay, in this moment, I have access to my consciousness. I have access to will. I have access to this divine support network I have been building up over the years of meditation and being outdoors and prayer. Okay, how can I do magic to transform this situation so that it can become maybe just bearable, maybe a bit more beautiful, maybe there's something really wonderfully different that I can do here to lift us out of everyday suffering, to lift us out of that sense of, I don't have any control and the entire world's on fire and I just want to hide under my bed.
Yeah. Yeah. And I see magic in many ways as just creativity. And it's kind of what I was saying, when you're in alignment and you're one with the earth and you feel that connection, and you open your heart and your mind to what is. The world is a very magical place. I actually went to a fairy forest in Nebius Forest, I think is what it's called, in France. And it's, got the same kinds of traditions. I mean, people there just really accept that fairy energies are real, fairies are real. And it was my first real exposure to this whole mystical, magical, things that you read in fairy tales, honestly, in this forest. And I was giggling like a little girl. I was playing and I'm like, okay, well, putting that on a shelf somewhere, because I don't quite, my adult logic mind just can't process this right now.
Right.
But yeah, this is a big world. And for me, I also look at magic very similar to, I love the way that you phrased it as changing the consciousness at will. I also see it too as just being at one with all that is. Because if you are at one with all that is, there's light and there's dark. There's the underworld, if you will. There's the mystery and the Black Panther in the jungle, and and there's just the whitest, brightest light, energies. And for me, I had to give myself permission. And this is where that sovereignty comes in, right? To open to all that is, not just what was handed to me on this cute little pretty packaged, honestly, patriarchal set of guidelines and ways of thinking, doing, and being. So Yeah. There's so much beauty. And when we go boldly into these frontiers of the unknown, which I'm drawn to that. It's my nature. Not everyone is like that, but I'm assuming you have a very similar adventurous spirit to climb into the underworld and understand and go into mystic and mystery. For me, it was very important on my spiritual path to just to feel it, not just read about it.
Right, right. I've always known I could never be satisfied with what you see is what you get world, because we are constantly in relationship with the unknown and the unseen. And to me, that is in so many ways the most exciting parts of being alive.
Yes, I 100% agree. Okay, let's talk about your archetypes because the old archetypes, which I was so refreshed to hear your wise woman, but because that was traditionally the crone, but you had, instead of the maiden, mother, crone, you've come up with these beautiful images and archetypes. So, and I love the phrases that come with them. So why don't you speak to that?
Yes. So I offer up free the princess, crown the queen, embrace the wise woman. And the way it initially, I thought that I needed to slay the princess to crown the queen. And it was in the process of writing this, and I hadn't even assumed there was a wise woman yet. I was just, because I had woken up in my early 30s and my mother had died. I quit my job. I was suddenly realized I was home with my baby, almost wholly reliant on my husband and dad for financial and emotional support. And I just said, whoa, like I've had a job since I was 12. And all of a sudden I'm so reliant on these lovely, but guys, what am I doing? So I thought that I needed to slay the princess, and because I had to grow up real fast. And then my vision of this evolved over several years. And I really started to recognize this princess, queen, and wise woman. I always have been and always want to be all three. Because if I'm trying to cut myself off from my princess self, she is my adventurous spirit. She is my giggles. She is my sensuality and my sexuality. And she's my ability to play with my daughters and really understand them and their growth. If I slayed her, what would I be missing out on? And I'd also be missing out on that really smart girl who was 15 years old and recognized that she had the spirituality of a rock and she needs to go outside in the garden. And so when I realized I needed to hold the princess, I also wanted to find this new way to be the queen, because there had been this, I guess, almost over fetishization of what it meant to wear the crown and be in charge of my own life. And there is a lot to that, if you run your own business, you're running a family, you're holding down a job, or you're holding all these different things. You need that managerial, competent, compassionate, caregiving energy that the queen offers you. But she's not supposed to be doing it all herself. She needs the support of that princess and also of the wise woman. The wise woman is, as you said, it's wonderful to release her from crone, because goodness knows there is powerful and important crone energy that I love and adore. And I know that it's, I've been trying to access that in my 20s and 30s and now in my 40s. I don't want to wait till, all this red hair goes white before I feel like I can really step into her, because that wise woman has always been part of me. And when you're not holding the crone at arm's length, I think it also really changes our ability to really embrace aging and to say, well, that's not just a someday thing. It's that my timeless ancient self has always been here. There will be a point where I'm going to look a lot more like her all the time. But even then, when I am that wise woman crone, I want to have the laughter of the princess and the take charge nature of the queen, so I can sit in that stillness of the wise woman and say, oh, honey, I have seen it all. What is really making you so troubled? Let's sit with it, and then let's understand that on the other side of all this is eternity, not just these little, beautiful, difficult, tangled up human lives we live. Yeah. Because we're supposed to always be in this divine human self. What matters here on this earth is very important. And it's only the smallest little sliver of our much, much bigger wise woman existence.
I love it. Yeah, I definitely need to free the princess. I'm straight up going to tell you, I was talking with Deborah in the previous episode about I've been more serious by nature. I was a very giggly, playful girl, but as I got older, I became very responsible, this Capricorn, like structured, like, business and just getting the degree and just doing everything by the book and checklisting everything. And it I was, kind of this high achiever, I guess, person. And I really have to temper that with play. And I'm finding that that's why the universe, God, and angels sent me these two children later in life. I'm 51 and I have a 6 and a almost 8-year-old. And they came later in life to teach me that. And I'm awake. I'm aware of that.
Mm-hmm.
and I know that it's not just about me. Like they have their own path being in our family. They came by 2 separate private adoptions. But it's just so interesting to me that when I resist that wonder, and I think you use this word a lot too, just the wonder of being alive, of discovery, of curiosity. My sister taught me curiosity overrides fear. And children are so curious and they're so full. Everything's awe-inspiring and wonderful.
Yeah.
And for me, I had put that to the side in favor of my busy life and kind of that professional, stepping into that. I mean, I can go into the wise woman really quickly, and I really have always embraced the mother queen and all of that. But for whatever reason, I did slay the princess. I mean, I did. And it's just reclaiming her that is filling my life with more wonder. But it does not come as easy as it does to other souls, I think, for me to just be in that playful princess or that freeing. But that word freedom is really up for me right now.
Yeah, and I've certainly heard that from many other women, that they have that immediate reaction to princess, like, I've left her behind. That one made all these mistakes. She did all this crazy stuff. Whether she was self-centered or she had all this risky behavior. And it's that, like, I hear you, but let's wait a minute, because again, we need her to be freed within us. And that's why, when I call and I invite you to, explore the princess, the queen, and the wise woman, there's certain qualities I associate with each one of the archetypes. And the princess comes with an invitation to consider celebration. And so all that play, and also forgiveness, because we need to forgive ourselves for our youthful indiscretions, even like that stupid thing we said to our neighbor yesterday, that sense of, because we often associate the princess with being, thoughtless and brash and careless. Well, guess what? We all do that every now and again. And if we're so clamped down and our inner perfectionist, our overcommitted queen, is working so hard to hold everything together, we're not allowed to screw up. We're not allowed to burn dinner. We're not allowed to, forget that the kids have another Zoom call.
And I have to say that that's the patriarchy right there, that I was raised to not be a princess, to set aside this lighthearted, certainly not celebratory of the feminine sitting in those structures. Right. And I'm talking about religious. It was just, okay, you are a mother. That is your whole eternal whatever. Like, that's here on earth and in the next life. You're just a mother.
Right. And so it's so interesting how sometimes the patriarchy says, no, we're closing off princess right away. You need to go take this next role. And then in other aspects of patriarchal culture, women remain sort of infantilized and constantly in that princess role, like, oh, honey, just go shopping. Don't worry, it's just girl money. And there's ways in which certain cultures have invited women not to step into their power. So I love how from all the different ends of the spectrum, we're still really called to say, wait a minute, this is an original energy inside of me that has its own magic, its own kind of purity. How can I allow that to be part of my reality now on my own terms, not somebody else's?
Right. And as you said, all these are like archetypes of the sovereignty, right? The sovereign goddess, if you will, or, I mean, how does the goddess fit into all of this? Is she just...
Yeah, I know some women really love that sense of like the goddess within and claiming that self as goddess. That doesn't really work for me, because I personally I go with my own divine humanity, but it's really like I'm a messy person. And so I claim these archetypes as part of me as sovereign being. And then I look to the goddesses, because especially in Celtic culture, everything comes in threes. So yes, that it's no coincidence that Maid Mother Crone existed. It's no coincidence that there's Princess, Queen, and Wise Woman. I look to my own sort of trinity of Celtic goddesses as sacred guides, as sacred companions, as beings. Like my best writing sessions are, having conversation with one goddess or another. I get into their stories more deeply in the book, but when I can talk to them and wait for them to talk back, they help me do that kind of lifting out of, the weeds of being everyday human stuff, and say, wait a minute, how is this part of the timeless cosmic plan? If you were sitting at the edge of a cliff in Ireland looking out at the roaring Atlantic, is this what you'd be thinking about right now? Where would you go with this dream? Where would you go with this trouble? How would you transform it?
I love that. So give me that. So for the princess, it was to free the princess. It's all about celebration and forgiveness. What was about crowning the queen? What were those?
Crowning the queen is about desire and gratitude. And it's that sense of recognizing all that you have, all that you've achieved, that what's beneath your feet, and also what you're still searching for. And in the sense of desire, what is it you truly want besides that which you've been told by commodification, by, family lineage, by the habits of your neighbors? What is it you truly want, and what is it you're truly happy that you have?
And that right there is so powerful. I did a workshop several years ago, and I was with a group of women, probably in their, I would say, early 30s to early 50s. And most of them were mothers. And it was just, what do you want? We started there. Yeah. And the majority of them did not know, because they had been it was revelatory to me, honestly. It was one of the things that set me on the path of that creativity, wonder, magic, finding the feminine, because I was like, we have been told that what we desire is not that important, or should be sacrificed, or, whatever, in favor of XYZ, or that it's not righteous, it's not holy to have desires that, and I'm not even talking about sexuality or things of the flesh or temptations of the flesh. I'm just talking about, what if I want to pursue something that doesn't fit this box? What if I want to go to France and into a fairy forest, right? Like, like I'm just saying, like, my giving myself that permission was huge. And I realized those years ago that was part of my path, is to help women get in touch with what they actually want and then advocate for it. And then that's where the sovereignty comes in. And it's like, I'm drawn to this and I don't know why, but I am. And I want to make sure it's okay. Is it okay? And we find ourselves checking it out with everyone else.
Right.
So you got to crown yourself with that, right? That's the crown the queen.
Exactly. And it's a lifelong process. And so much of it's about remembering, that sense of remembering, putting back together, what was it that I once wanted? I count myself one of the luckiest people in the world, that I went to college wanting to become a professional Irish person, quote unquote. You could only say that as a American high school kid in the 90s. And then it's like, wait, here I am 20 years later, and I get to talk about Celtic goddesses as part of my work, and recognize that just women's eyes just light up, and you can just see their energy start to expand. They're remembering something too. Yes.
We are starving for that. We are starving for mother. We are starving for goddesses.
Yes.
Okay. So what is Embrace the Wise Woman? What are her characters?
Wise Woman invites us to consider mortality and eternity. And so in that sense of, death is always part of life. Life is always part of death. A lot of my journey is informed by, my mother died of a sudden and unexpected heart attack just after her 60th birthday. I was 31 with my first baby, and the whole world fell apart. My mom was we were born on the same day under the sign of Gemini. She and I were twin souls in so many ways. And it was after she was gone that I started to reckon with this wise woman in the sense of saying, how can we, without slipping into morbidity, how do we understand that mortality is not only part of life, but it's some sort of asset and something that we get to explore and work with and consider. And it's really that gateway to what we were talking before, in the sense of the wise woman's view on eternity, and saying that this life we're living right now is one sliver of something that is infinitely greater than we often allow ourselves to think about when we're living according to progressive time, when we're trying to, live according to somebody else's goals, when we're making sure that our kids are then fulfilling those next round of goals. Let's sit down and think about, we have this one precious life that we get to live in this experience, and then it goes on forever. What does that do to expand your mind and kind of blow your mind in the best possible way?
We don't want to ever have to live with regret. I mean, when you were giving that image of sitting out overlooking the roaring Atlantic on an Irish cliff, I was like, that's so powerful of an image. I mean, think about, what is before us, what is behind us. And we don't want to ever have to say that we lived our life for everyone else. I mean, and that is the woman martyr syndrome. That is the feminine plight, if you will, is all of this beautiful heart for service that she embodies, and needing to direct that somewhere, but not ever finding who she actually is in her authenticity to bring that magic of her own sovereign power. Because of the steeped tradition. It's just hard. I've seen this with, women that I greatly admire. Many of them I'm related to. It's beautiful that there's so much love that can come from our grandmothers, our mothers. And it's almost like they look to us to show them what they couldn't speak. Or they look to us to show, I don't know. It's just like the whole silencing of the feminine, the whole martyr thing, the whole giving up and putting on the altar sometimes your very life force to bring others into theirs. I think that is fading, as it should. Again, we honor that there were women who did that, right, but at the expense of their own happiness and their own joy and creativity, oftentimes.
Yes. I play with that. I know I certainly in the book, I, wonder about what my mother what would she have done with what should have been the last third of her life? How would she have looked back on the 30 years that she spent, caring for children? And I eventually landed in this space of understanding, and it echoes what you say too, like, of course, honoring every woman's sovereign journey to say, wow, at the same, my mother had this, she was moderately successful in a career and this and that, but ultimately I can say she was a happy person. And there are times when in my endless striving for sovereignty, I have had trouble landing at that spot. So it's almost that sense of, how do I combine my vision for what I would like to say in the world, for what the books I'd like to publish, the people's lives I'd like to touch, with that sense of a contentment that I learned from my mother and grandmother, even though it might be possible to judge that, wow, were their lives as big as they wanted them to be?
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know, but I certainly know I had such love there. How can I hold both? My own bigger vision of, this is my sovereign story, my sovereign song I'm going to sing to the world, and that sense of the hearth, and whether or not it's being an amazing kitchen witch or not, whether it's just saying, when I'm with the people who depend on me, I'm generating that kind of love that inspires them to feel loved and to be loved and to go step into their own sovereign story.
Yes, thank you for bringing that up, because there was a simplicity that they embraced and found a measure of happiness with. And there was also a yearning, I think, to find something more, so maybe an outlet that was deeper, and for some women maybe not at all, even now. Like things have just gotten so complex, but I think I find myself yearning to keep things, to just continually simplify and simplify and simplify and get to the heart of things.
It's like that quest for how we find that both and consciousness in all ways.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. Yeah. And even embracing the paradox that we are and that we are living in, and all the polarity and everything. Okay. So I want to kind of round out with your link to storytelling, because you've just become this master storyteller, and it's really, really expressed through you how you create that deeper connection with the world around you, and helps others, transform in many ways. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, I mean, I was, there's some of those amongst us, myself included, who, feel born to be a writer. And that was always me. And yet, of course, I lost track of that at many different points in life, whether because, I was dating somebody who seemed like a better writer, or I was focused on trying to, build a career. It's always been kind of my the most powerful thing in my toolbox, both for self-discovery, both for creativity, and for this kind of magical work of how I want to help shift and change the world. So it was kind of a long process of eventually embracing and saying, "Oh, this is the thing that's so fundamental to me. I can build off of it, and I can offer it to other people pretty effortlessly." Of course, there's the work that goes into it, but it's that sense of like, "Oh, this is my original magic," right? And I think when a lot of us can tap into that, it helps us along the path, and it helps us help others. So, like in my book, I always rely on, offering up writing prompts, because I think it's that sense of sitting with a blank piece of paper, whether you've stolen it from the kids' art cabinet or you've got a beautiful journal, and being able to give yourself that space and time with a blank white page is in itself an amazing sovereignty exercise, because it is just you and the unknown. It's that, we were talking before about the cliff. It's like standing behind you is everything you've thought and seen and experienced. And standing ahead of you is that great, beautiful, possibility-filled nothingness that you get to pour in your imagination, as well as your pain, as well as your excitement, as well as your yearning, and really gather all those different pieces together. Because for me, writing is one of the most magical of all spells. And I love how spelling and spell all come together, because you're doing that work of translating the past and all that you were in this present moment. Where am I right now? And then you can come back later in the future and look back to say, what was it that was important to me on that particular morning when I was looking at that particular sunrise?
Yeah.
And to be able to go there and be that, like, it's such a pedestrian thing. There's books everywhere. Writers have existed for, millennia. And yet it's one of the most powerful and potent activities we have. And it's so easy for so many of us. I invite everybody to try to find a way, whether you see yourself as a writer who hasn't been writing, or someone who's afraid of because, you had a mean English teacher, or any other, someone might see what you wrote. When you can move through that and give yourself that permission we talked about, that's such a beautiful gateway and doorway for so many.
I love that. I want to encourage everyone to get your book, because I know you have writing prompts at the end of each chapter. It's called The Sovereignty Knot: A Woman's Way to Freedom, Power, Love, and Magic. And Marisa, as we kind of close out our discussion, I know that you are big into the new way of the feminine and a new vision for a new earth and an equitable world. Can you just kind of leave us maybe with your vision of all these beautiful people awakening to their sovereignty and walking the earth?
Can I read you a little bit from the book?
Please.
Okay. To be sovereign is to stand fully in your own power, At the practical level, when you're sovereign, you take conscious, compassionate responsibility for your own choices and your responses to the world around you. At the magical level, when you're sovereign, you fully embody your divine human self while your feet are rooted into a wild embrace with the earth and your hair is all spangled with stars. When you're sovereign, you're a clear-eyed, compassionate, confident woman with an unshakable belief in your own purpose and your own promise, who is dedicated to a life marked by peace and passion. But we cannot leave this exploration of sovereignty there. To see this merely as an individual journey leads to a life of self-absorption and complacency that just might veer into, phew, I got mine, now take me to the beach. The goal isn't to craft a new gospel of selfishness. When you're sovereign, you're grounded in self-love and self-worth, so you can be strong and supple enough to care for your family, your community, the global community, and the earth.
That just gave me the chills. That is just breathtaking. Thank you. And thank you for sharing today. I just loved where we went with this.
Oh, it's been such an honor. Thank you for inviting me to go on this journey with you.
So, free the princess, crown the queen, and embrace the wise woman. That is really what it's all about. And I like how she talked about how there are two things that they invite us to, and that is celebration and forgiveness. Celebrate who you actually are, practice radical self-compassion, and just constantly forgive yourself. And then you, by default, begin to be that way with others in your life. So I hope you all see yourselves as the sovereign goddesses you are, and that we're all in training for this. Honestly, it's like a lifetime quest to be able to claim and step into our actual authentic selves at our higher self soul level. You can find Marisa Gowdy on marisagowdy.com. You can go to my website, cherieburton.com. And I hope that you have a glorious week, a magical week, knowing that magic is the art of changing consciousness at will.